can also come in the form of cyber blackmail, where someone tricks or pressures you into sending sexual images of yourself and threatens to share the pictures on social media unless you comply with their demands. Nancy Hendry, a senior advisor for the International Association of Women Judges, states that abusing a position of authority to extort sex is not only a form of sexual abuse, but also a form of corruption, where sex rather than money is the currency of the bribe.
The animation highlighted the intricacies of sextortion, and it reveals how it is not much different from sexual harassment. And as the animation stated, it is also a form of corruption with sex rather than money as the currency of the bribe. And this makes the realities of sextortion much darker. In Uganda, prison officials were demanding sex from female prisoners in exchange for delivery of life-saving medication. In Central America, border guards were demanding sex from women seeking to cross the border and travel north. You know, Sethulo, here in South Africa, we do have cases of teachers demanding sex from students for marks.
And you know, according to News 24 reporters, there have been cases where female students were demanded to sleep with educators so that they get good grades.
And in some instances, women are told they have to provide sexual favors to benefit financially or career-wise. And that reveals how deeply the abuse of power has rooted itself in our communities.
You know, Camngca, to further that, in an article by Corruption Watch, it is stated that for over 10 years, they've received disturbing reports of alleged corruption across basic and higher education institutions throughout the country, with 3,417 reports that are from primary and secondary schools. And Sector Education and Training Authority, SETAs, with 183 reports, and 67 reports are from TVET colleges. You know, this shows the link between acts of corruption across these institutions, exposing the struggle to secure education from primary to tertiary level.
And since laws against gender-based violence acknowledge consent as a defense, even in circumstances of compulsion, sextortion has long existed but lacked an official term. The term sextortion was coined by the International Association of Women Judges in response to similar circumstances in which officials were abusing women and requesting sexual favors in exchange for privileges all over the world. Our team conducted interviews with members of the Rhodes University student body. Let's take a look.
Sextortion. I've never heard of it. Like, it's my first time.
One of the few things that comes to mind is like abuse of superior position of someone abusing or using their abuse of power to coerce someone into sexual relations unwillingly. And where the other end of the person is doing the exchange on a sexual practice with no consent or willingly consent. I think that's how I see it, yeah.
A lot of women are victims to sextortion and are threatened. They are vulnerable to these types of actions.
But I've seen that it's mostly outwardly experienced by women. Although I will say that a lot of men experience it, and usually they don't report it as much as women do.
Having people speak about it more, because the practicalities, like the legal things, may get tricky. So it's like, I believe that starting small, such as just spreading awareness about it, making sure, talking to people, warning them about this particular person in power and whatnot. That's what I believe goes with it.
So I think definitely making this a crime and making this, putting it in the justice system will definitely protect women's rights and protect their dignity as well.
Thank you to our Rhodes University students for sharing their thoughts. Joining me in the studio today are three esteemed panelists who are pivotal for today's topic. We have Advocate Moloni, who's an acting judge of the High Court in Makhanda, Eastern Cape. And also she's a member of the Eastern Cape Bar and the Eastern Cape Societies for advocates, societies for advocates. I'm sorry. And we have Dr. De Vega, who is a lecturer at Rhodes University under the School of Journalism and Media Studies, and Miss Melinda, who is the former manager of the Anti-Harassment Office at Rhodes University. Welcome to the show. And to begin our discussion, I would like to know, is sextortion downright illegal, or is it a favor for a favor? My question is posed to my panelists.
Short answer is I have no idea. I just watched your clip earlier and I was thinking it's some kind of form of prostitution almost. But in terms of being an actual crime, I don't know. I don't think so. It's corruption to some extent. So there may be something in a statute somewhere, but it's more along the lines of sexual harassment, which isn't per se illegal, in my thoughts anyway.
Expert. I'm definitely not going to disagree with Nicola, but what I would like to say is that I think we coin phrases very easily, and then we hang importance to that phrase. And sextortion is so many things rolled in one, if I listen to your clips. And I would personally refer to this as an offence under the Sexual Offences Act. I will see it as harassment. And when you look at some of the cyber crimes that are occurring, so a little bit of all the things that people mentioned in your clips and that you've referred to actually falls into different statutes, and there would be a legal action that can be taken. And I also think that we must remember that, not must remember, but what would be good to consider is that we have different communities experiencing different things. So maybe a Rhodes student on Rhodes campus will experience something specifically, and for that purpose Rhodes will have their own policies in place that will speak to the statutes and to the protection of students. So it's a good question to ask, well, is it illegal? Of course, in my opinion, the way it's been discussed here, it's illegal, but also that there are steps that can be taken in terms of policy to protect students from having to experience this within a campus setup.
Agreed. And we always have to balance this idea between what is legally acceptable or unacceptable, and then what is ethical. And very often where there are not legal guidelines in place, ethics can dictate what is and is not acceptable. So for instance, around issues of university spaces, the policies in place could be really useful, but in workplaces there must be some kind of contractual obligations around hiring people for employment. So while it might not be a crime per se, within the codes of conduct, within the policies of those particular institutions, there must be something around hiring practices and what is acceptable terms. And then when we hear from schools, you're entering into the debate about how school kids are having to experience this idea of, sexual favors, that's a clear violation of children's rights and safety around sexual abuses, etc. So depending on the context specific, or the case in essence, it would dictate the context around it.
Thank you for that. Miss Milanda, my question is that, as someone you work at the Anti-Harassment Office, now my question is, the office provided a culture where students could speak freely about such cases?
Oh, definitely. One of the most important things is the fact that confidentiality is what we need to really make students experience and be aware of, because I think a lot of people don't want to step up and come and see somebody, because what if everyone knows about what happened to me? Because although one of these people say we must speak a lot about it, a lot of times a victim of sexual harassment, sexual abuse, domestic violence, because a lot of the things that you've mentioned, which I would put in those sort of categories, they would share with one person, but they would be scared that it would go out. So I think the first thing we do talk about is the confidentiality. The second thing is that there is a lot of bite at Rhodes University, if I may use the word very loosely, where the policies are very well written, and as far as I am aware, they are also busy with an updated policy so that it protects students and staff very much. So students definitely, especially your postgrads who have supervisors, and there might be a sort of thing of, well, I'm your supervisor, if you want to make this happen, that might happen. And postgrads are particularly maybe easier victims to that because they're not in an open class where everyone can say, yeah, I saw him do that or I saw her do that. So I think that's the sort of thing that looking at the various policies, it is in place to answer your question, and it is definitely enforced. And the word enforce has such an ugly meaning perhaps, but meaning that when it's spoken of, there are things that can be put in place to protect, to advance a better understanding and also to educate. And I think that is the biggest positive thing for me at Rhodes, where victims, if I may use the word victims instead of survivors, can come and speak. But often people say, I don't want to make a fuss, but I do want him or her to know why I am upset, why this felt like extortion, why this felt like abuse, and have that availability of calling somebody in and say, do you actually know what you were doing? No, but in my culture, one of the things is in my culture it's okay. I said, that's fine. Your culture is okay, but remember you're at Rhodes University. It's a cosmopolitan place, and we have to be able to live equally happy and without this whole pressure on us to perform for sexual favours or in any other way to be able to get ahead.
Okay, you mentioned like policies that are implemented by Rhodes University. Now my question is, are these policies good enough, or if I may use that word, good enough to protect the victims of sextortion? Or they just protect the perpetrators more than victims in a way?
Oh, no, I would never say that. Either the laws of the country or the policies protect the perpetrators. I think that is something we must really look at. When you look at policy at in an institution, so even with what Dr. De Vega mentioned at a company, your sexual offences policy at your company or at Rhodes University, as it may be, is there to protect you in terms of a disciplinary process. So it's to protect you internally, and there's internal things that should happen, and when there's a report, internal disciplinary hearing should take place. And there are certain things in terms of policies, and Rhodes University specifically has a fantastic policy where very, very clearly states everything to do with sexual abuse, sexual harassment. It is a very serious offence, and it will automatically go to the legal department, who will then prosecute in terms of the disciplinary case. So it's not a matter of somebody's going to be, hit on the wrist and say, "Oh, behave." It's really a matter of this happened, and we're not going to stop until our students feel safe. But again, it does come back to something that was also in the clips, where you might end up with somebody who tolerates the abuse and tolerates it until she or he has their degree, and then say, I'm willing to speak out now, because they are scared of the repercussions, because it might be a situation of they feeling, I'm going back to the postgrads, where it's a him and her situation or a her on her situation. It's so much easier when it is, as I said, in class. A lot of people will say, but my friend saw this and this one saw this, and that helps. But I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but definitely the policies are very well written, and they're being updated. That is the other thing that people forget. A policy is only allowed to be 5 years old, and then it has to be reconsidered. And this is the policy for sexual offences. Dealing with all of that is currently in the process of being updated.
To further my question, as a former manager of the anti-harassment office, now my question is that, may you please maybe give me roughly the statistics of cases that were found at Rhodes University, and in those cases, have perpetrators been put out there so that we know that these people are perpetrators? Okay. Because we get to know about victims.
Yes.
Victims are put out there, but then do we know about the perpetrators?
Yes, I hear what you're saying. Look, number one, I didn't prepare statistics. As I'm former, I no longer have access to those. But to answer your question in a different way, there's no such thing as putting, like the sexual offences register. A lot of people talk about the sexual offences register. You must have heard of it. That is our national register that's linked to being found guilty in a court of law for a sexual offence. And that also includes anything to do with sexual offences on children, or anything under the Sexual Offences Act. Now, that is being found guilty, so it's beyond reasonable doubt. Whereas if you have a report to me and you decide not, for instance, to proceed, or there's no disciplinary case, I cannot go about and say, oh, my palu did this to you. It's your choice whether you say that or not. And if he's not found guilty or she's not found guilty, even with a guilty finding now, they won't put his name up on a board or say, at Rhodes University, these are our sexual offenders. I don't think that is appropriate in any case. because now we're going back into the rights of people, general people. But whether it's appropriate or not, the action is being taken. And it's a matter, I know what you're saying. There's a lot of focus on victim, but there's very few focus on perpetrator. And you would like to have a register where it says this person is guilty of. And that is just not appropriate unless it has gone to court.
Thank you so much, Ms. Minanda. That was very insightful. Let us take a short break. We'll be right back.
You've made it through undergrad, perhaps even settled into a job. The brightest future is in your hands. But how many people achieve anything worthwhile entirely alone? Let's talk about a university globally respected for research, with closer guidance, relevant courses, the potential bridge between aspiring and real success. Rhodes University, where leaders learn.
Welcome back. Before the ad break, we had a discussion with Ms. Milanda, who talked about sextortion from the Anti-Harassment Office. Now, let us hear from Dr. De Vega. Dr. De Vega, my question is that what ethical challenges do journalists face when they're trying to report on cases of sextortion, especially if the case involves the minor?
Oh, I see. Okay. So just to think about the Rhodes University space, I would like to say that I have seen people fired from Rhodes University for sexual harassment related crimes. So there are people who were here who are no longer here, and I've seen that in my time here. And so there's really a firm line drawn when it comes to what's expected of staff within this space. I think the challenge becomes when you're talking about students, because there's a different set of expectations around student contracts, etc., and how the law applies and how evidence was gathered. So I think that's just the one thing I wanted to notice about that. How issues are covered within the media, it's challenging. So first of all, you can't name victims or any vulnerable groups unless they've consented to it, and they need to be above age to be able to consent. And even then, telling somebody's story, you've got to be so sensitive to what they've experienced, to how they want to be, how they want their story to be told, how they want to be portrayed, whether they want to be portrayed as a victim, whether they want to be portrayed as an activist, whether they want to be portrayed as a survivor. The way that you tell their story really needs to be not just with their consent, but also alongside them. I think it's really important. But we don't see a lot of that, because as stories unfold, whether it's in courts or whether it's by public opinion, we see constant updates, because the 24-hour news cycle means there's always a new update, and it's not always very focused on people and their lived experiences. So I think the first thing is a level of sensitivity and care, which is important. But the codes state you cannot name individuals, especially not vulnerable victims, and children cannot be named without consent. And then it's illegal to name children, even if you do have parental consent. The consent is really questionable, because under the Children's Protection Act, you cannot name a victim under the age of 18, and now the laws changed about 2 or 3 years ago that once they turn 18, any child who's involved in any kind of crime, their records are sealed. So it becomes questionable. But I think reporting with care and sensitivity, especially of people who are vulnerable and have had difficult experiences, is important. But I'm sure our judge will have more to say about the law.
Okay, to further that, I was about to ask, is it ever ethical to report someone if he's a victim or a suspect? But now my question is, how do you report, or how do you raise awareness on cases or about sextortion without re-traumatizing the victims or sensationalizing the issue?
So I think the first thing is reporting and public awareness is critical, whether it's through journalism or through research. So we've seen a recent report by Equality Now, which published this idea of sextortion, where women are being not really trafficked, but under the guise. So if you think of online or technologically supported gender-based violence, women are applying for jobs online, and they're going to Oman or Dubai, and they're going to work in other people's households as nannies or maids, whatever support infrastructure is available, they're being told they'll be paid this much, etc. When they get there, the environment is not what they were promised. So they're working under slave conditions, they're working for multiple households, they're being paid 1/5 of what they were promised. Some are beaten, some are raped, sexually difficult environments filmed, and then that's used to blackmail them. IDs and passports are taken away. So there's different versions of how this looks globally. And it's important that we raise awareness about it, because how are people going to know to be careful of jobs posted online when your ticket is being paid and you are told that you can get there without checking the agencies, what's expected, the standards, the promises being made, etc. I think awareness is critical, but the how the awareness is important. So that report, for instance, anonymized the individuals who had experienced this. Some of them were already online. We saw that video. I mean, there was this terrible video going around about Dubai and the feces video.
Yes,
There's multiple videos online. But in those reports, the people were anonymized and their stories were told to create awareness of the situation without labeling their names or their faces. So I think the story is strong enough. You don't need to put somebody's face around the violence to be able to tell the story. But it's important that the stats are reported, that the situations are reported, and awareness of how to avoid those situations, but also to fact check anyway. We'll talk about recommendations later, but it's critical that it is reported and reported in various formats that are appropriate to audiences, because there's a huge uptake of children actually being dealing with versions of sextortion, where they're online and they're chatting on these gaming apps, whether it's Roblox, whether it's whatever these gaming apps are, and they start chatting with these young kids and they create a relationship, and 8 months later they're asking for, send me a picture of yourself. 8 months of conversation, send me a photo of yourself, and the photo becomes more and more revealing until with a year later you've got a child 10 years old, 15 years old, that has now shared some kind of sexual photograph and is now caught up in an international crime syndicate, because once you've sent one photo, they'll start asking you for pornographic images, or else we will tell, or asking for money. So there's variations of how, these particular cyber crimes or in-person crimes are committed. And it's important to tell the levels of that story so that people are aware, parents are aware, people seeking work are aware, etc.
Thank you for that. Advocate, Dr. Terry mentioned something about cybercrime. Now I want to know, can someone be charged if sextortion happened online or across the country?
Well, yes, is the short answer. It really depends. To use your example, getting images from children, for example, after having groomed them carefully for months on end. And then in order not to tell, you get them to send you progressively worse or more pornographic images. Child pornography obviously is illegal, and to the extent that it's going out there, you are, I suppose, distributing it to some extent. So, yes, it is illegal, but catching people is another story. It's difficult.
It's difficult. Okay, so when I asked the first question, is sextortion downright illegal, or is it a favor for a favor? Our panelists responded that it is not under the law. So it doesn't appear as illegal under the law. But should someone be fined with enough evidence that provides that they are implicated in this case? Can someone be charged, and what legal punishment can a perpetrator face for it?
I think it depends on the circumstances. There are a lot of tendrils, I think, to sextortion, particularly in education, but also most people would associate it with the work context. I think from a work point of view, not usually illegal until it gets taken to the next level. So if there's a sexual assault involved. With children, we know grooming is now an offence. And I saw a case prosecuted very recently involving that, but it's not something you see often, because it can be a very nuanced, insidious thing that is hard to pin down, especially with children. And I've forgotten where I'm going with this now.
Okay, let me just ask this. What are the first step maybe a victim of sextortion could take legally?
I suppose it depends on her environment. If it relates to the work context, then human resources usually deals with that sort of thing. A place like Rhodes, you would go to the anti-harassment office. Depending on the nature of what's involved, you could, I suppose, go to the police or a legal person. But I can tell you specifically from my own experiences with Rhodes, and I've done student disciplinary hearings and staff disciplinary hearings, a lot of them in this building. And there are a lot of sexually related GBV matters that are being taken to disciplinary hearings. And students are being excluded, staff are being dismissed. It is taken very, very seriously. But the difficulty is, and you were talking about it earlier, do we get to name and shame? Or is it kept confidential? And it's a very tricky question to answer, because a lot of victims don't want everyone to know. They sort of feel like maybe they brought it on themselves, or, you know, should have been more emphatic about things. And you need to establish a relationship of trust with them. And if they don't want anyone knowing about it, then it becomes a problem to actually get information out there. But I think, having statistical information is useful. But I don't know if particular names would actually serve anyone.
I think.
Can I just quickly respond on something? When I was still with the police, we had a couple of cases where young boys, they were between the ages of 15 and 21. Bear with me about the 21. They would have a WhatsApp come from an unknown number, and in the WhatsApp profile picture there would be this luscious blonde woman, and this woman would say, "I think you're so beautiful, you're so fantastic. Please send me a picture of you topless." And the boys would go and they would take a picture and they would send it, and they would say, "Well, I want a dick pic." And they would do that, and then all of a sudden, once both have been sent, the person would say, "Right, I've got this now," and they would open a Facebook page and they would, do things on it and say, "I am going to send it to all your friends on Facebook to show how you circulate porn. You must give me airtime, or you must buy me this, or you must buy me that." And it's always something that's transacted online over WhatsApp, so you can just send, text it and things like that. That to me is the closest I've come to is proper sextortion, and in this case it happened to me, not a woman. But in that case they came to us, they showed us everything, including all the pictures that were shared, and case dockets were opened, and it was then investigated. But it was investigated in terms of cybercrimes and under the Harassment Act. So a long version answer to your short question is yes, there is a way of doing it, but as Nicola said, always have to find out what is the actual thing that's happened, and then from that, under which law can we actually proceed.
Okay. Back to you, Advocate. I would like to know if someone finds themselves in that situation, like a victim is reporting a case now, you have that case. My question is, how long can someone face, like, the legal punishment?
If you're talking sexual assault, because as Melinda said, it depends on the circumstances. So if it transpires to meet the requirements for sexual assault, then it can be imprisonment, depending on the nature of it. I've seen people go to prison for 3 to 5 years for what you might have considered a fairly innocuous sexual assault. But anything obviously more serious than that is lengthy prison sentences. Children particularly, there are specific mandatory minimum sentences that mostly have to be applied, usually starting at 10 years and going upwards. Yes, it very much depends. If it's something that doesn't fall under a particular law, and so you can't be said to have committed a crime, but you've done something wrong within the workplace context or the student context, then you deal with things like dismissal or exclusion. Those are the consequences for you. There is a Protection from Harassment Act that can be utilized as well if somebody won't leave you alone. But that is usually a situation where you're not being necessarily bribed or blackmailed to do anything. And the extortion part of sextortion, in my mind, is an exchange. as opposed to forcing yourself on someone. So yes, it very much depends on the facts. I'm afraid that's a lawyer answer, but
Thank you so much for that. Thank you to our panelists for sharing their thoughts. To take this further, we now turn to our expert, Mrs. Nontethelelo, who is the founder of African Women Against Corruption Network, to unpack the psychosocial impact of sextortion and what can be done to stop it.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Nontethelelo, and I am the founding director of the African Women Against Corruption Network, which is now affectionately known as Awaken. Awaken is a non-profit organization on a mission to advance the participation of women in the anti-corruption agenda. If you think about it, globally, corruption has always been viewed purely from a financial and institutional lens. So you essentially abuse power for personal gain. But what does this abuse of power usually entail? And what does this personal gain usually is all about, where sex rather than money is the currency of the bribe. And this is why, or where Awaken then enters the picture, because we are challenging this narrative by really just simply, exposing corruption's gender dimensions, because we believe that corruption is not only just a governance failure, but it's also a violation of human dignity, and one that unfortunately disproportionately affects women and girls. Research had told us that women are the ones who are disproportionately affected, but that didn't mean that we are excluding men. That men are also could be victims of this kind of corruption, because again, what's always at the center of this is who has the power and what are they, who needs the benefit that comes from that power. So from that particular instance, I think it is important that we have now really started to engage men through our Awaken Men initiative that we're currently running now, where we have a separate conversation. You know what? We need everybody to come on board and start really firstly calling it what it is. We are here, we can see you, and we can see what you're doing, and what you're doing is corruption. They are the instruments that we currently help, and they don't necessarily help victims of sexual corruption. What I will say, though, is that, victims of sexual corruption, they don't report this kind of corruption because they don't feel safe. Victims also blame themselves, so they get blamed by the outside people, the outside factors, where you find that if you are in an employment relationship, your colleagues get to know about this, or because it's such a normalized thing, so everybody knows that you got into this position because you had to meet whoever in a hotel. And then, after that, you blame yourself. And we do need points where victims of sexual corruption can come and say, hey, I can come and report this form of corruption at any given point in time. And that can only come from creating safe spaces for dialogue, safe spaces for, students and also staff members to be able to say, hey, they're educated about this problem, they understand the problem on the ground, and also they know, what to look for, what it is, and what are the elements that describe the problem.
Thank you, Ms. Nontethelelo, for those valuable insights. We'll now move to our Q&A session, where we take questions and comments from our audience who joined us for today's discussion. To the audience, what are your comments and what are your questions from today's discussion?
Well, thank you very much for the very insightful debate that we have just had and the discussion. I feel that there is a gap in the law where there's nothing explicit about the use of sex in corruption cases. Like sex for a tender is not explicitly explained in the Public Finance Management Act. Sex for a transaction is not a commercial transaction, is not explicitly explained in the Prevention of Corrupt Practices Act. And the fact that there is a power asymmetry, and often the victim has got a right to the the service or the benefits that they are seeking. Like I went recently to East London to a discussion on sextortion with the Legal Resources Centre, and there were many women there, about over 150, many of them with tales of sextortion. And one of them mentioned that they desperately needed a job from the municipality, and hence posted, who must I sleep with at the municipality for me to finally get a job. So these are forms of corruption where the power asymmetry is very important. But if we're going to arrest corruption, we must cease to see it as a generic thing, and we must see it as a gendered crime and include expressly in our statutes the issue of sextortion. Thank you very much to the anchors.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think as a student leader and as a representative of somebody in the general student body, I think that this is very important that we bring more awareness, because I think that even as an individual of power, as an individual in the SRC, we hold the greater responsibility to protect students and also to not only bring their interests forward, but also as a male student, I think it's more important that our female student body feel empowered to speak out, because I think that there's a culture amongst universities to be like it's a boys' club, or to just say that it's boys catcalling young women, and we don't often see that they come and they're most vulnerable because they have to come to our offices, have one-on-one sessions, in certain situations where sensitivity and confidentiality need to be taken into account. So I think that awareness needs to be brought forward, and we also need to have more initiatives that speak to awareness, and also allowing ourselves to also be captured by the fact that we are the custodians of justice, if I can put it that way. We are guardians of their interests, so that we need to bring it forward so that individuals also know that we need to be held accountable as leaders. Yeah, I think those are.
Thank you guys for having us on the show as well. I wanted to kind of ask a question, because this topic is very interesting. To our panelists, I wanted to ask, where does the line fall for revenge porn? Because now, when we're talking about somebody who's already in a relationship, who already have been, sexual, and that was consensual. Now, let's say that relationship ends for whatever reason, and this person goes and posts that. Where does that kind of fall on the legal system, and what punishments or what other countermeasures can be taken for revenge porn in specific?
As far as I'm aware, there is a piece of legislation that was passed not a terribly long time ago that specifically makes revenge porn illegal. And I don't remember what it's called, unfortunately, but yes, that has been addressed. It is out there, and it's a good thing.
Okay.
I was going to say thank you for having us as well. Thank you for the insightful discussion. And also just wanting to pose a question for the panelists. And I think that has been recurring is that victims are scared to talk or scared to speak out. And as well, and I had this idea that possibly it could be, I think that there's a taboo behind this. So there's a question would be, what kind of ways to educate either the public and the victims on why is it such a taboo, and also removing that stigma that it is such a thing that needs to be reported. Thank you.
I think, well, it's actually quite a very difficult question, because how do you address any taboo? You are basically dependent on persons who have gone through it, who have spoken out, to be able to say, I'm willing to speak out and explain that I spoke out and I had no repercussions. And the things that I experienced is so positive that I would like everyone else to experience the same positivity. Unfortunately, in life, you might be the one person who gets to a place where you're asking for help and you're not treated as kindly as you personally need. And then you will say, well, I'm not speaking out anymore. And you will go and tell. And, humans are generally more willing to speak about negative stuff than about positive stuff. So to me, to dealing with the taboo is you actually have to create a culture where people know that where there's a confidential discussion and where people are accepting you and there's no judgment. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done with the people who are dealing with all sorts of sexual offences and sexual abuses, and in this in your reference, ma'am, to corruption, where people must know that there's somebody I can talk to who will not judge, because as humans we judge all the time. And we sit here and judge each other. Could she not wear a shorter skirt? Could she not have worn tighter? We are actually very judgmental, and that's where the taboo comes in more than. So that's that scaredness of being physically attacked and verbally attacked because you spoke out. And I think so. It's a double measure for me. It's people who are in the position of helping should have this immaculate reputation of really being there and willing to support at all times. And as humans, we need to start listening to ourselves and saying, shut up. You don't have to have an opinion if it's not based on fact. And literally nobody knows the facts of any sexual case except the victim themselves and the person who perpetrated against them. And we are very easy to say, I know more. You don't. You're not the victim. You're not the perpetrator. Keep quiet.
We do crucify victims,
We do.
though.
We do.
Case in point, the judge president of the Eastern Cape Division has been going through a very public sexual harassment matter. A clerk accused him of sexual harassment. It's all been televised. The whole thing comes down to emojis and emoji culture and what's acceptable and what's not. But she has been, crucified in the press for daring to speak out about this. And as a result, I think, we now have the very first ever sexual harassment policy for the judiciary. Believe it or not, they didn't have one before, because judges don't do that, except it can happen anywhere. And I think we forget that part. But yes, people don't want to speak out for obvious reasons as well.
Thank you so much from our panelists. Thank you so much to our audience for participating in today's discussion. Now handing over to my co-host.
Camngca nababukeli emakhaya, sextortion is not just harassment or corruption. It is the intersection of both a power-based and a transactional form of sexual exploitation that drives on power imbalances, psychological coercion, and the abuse of authority.
Today, what I learned is clear. Sextortion is not about consent, but about coercion and control. It strips victims of their dignity, harms their mental health, and silences their voices.
Kanti ngaphezu kwakho konke futhi lo mbidlango wokuxhaphaza ngokocansi umbidlango ongachaphazela noma ubani. And to our audience, to our Rhodes University community, and to our audience, and to our panelist, Miss Kodzea, Dr. De Vega, and Advocate Moloni, and Mrs. Akona from African Women Against Corruption Network. We sincerely appreciate your participation in this crucial discussion. In the dilemma of fragmented crude, glorified corruption, and the silencing of the powerful gun-blazing voices of the Fourth Estate, what stories will you tell? I am Nontethelelo, Sethulo, Chirwa.
And I am Camngca, Maduna. Khali ko ngasifanga asinoba sasilola behlesi bukhali kakade. And this is AMM TV. Until next time, mazenethole.